The distress call has been transmitting for 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and nothing in the dark has answered. Vox operator Sable. Orin knows this the way she knows her own heartbeat. Precisely, constantly, without having to think about it. She crouches in the shadow of a dead formation of black rock, her Vox caster braced against her knee, and she listens to the silence between her own signal and whatever should be coming back. 6 minutes and 50 seconds. The carrier wave hums its low, patient note. The Ghoul Stars hang above her like a sentence that hasn't finished yet. Nothing answers. This should concern her more than it does. Orin. Sergeant Irene Vale doesn't raise her voice. She has never needed to. 14 years of service have stripped every unnecessary decibel from her speech the way long exposure strips paint. Gradually, completely, without leaving a clean surface underneath. She materializes out of the dark at Sable's shoulder, eyes already on the structure ahead. Sitrep. Carrier wave nominal. Distress beacon broadcasting on primary and secondary channels. Sable pauses. No response. How long? 7 minutes. Vile says nothing. That is its own kind of answer. Ahead of them, across a flat expanse of grey regolith that reflects nothing, the structure sits. It has been sitting there since they first crested the ridge 40 minutes ago, and Pell made a sound in the back of his throat that wasn't quite a word. None of them had spoken for a moment after that. Not because it was terrifying. It wasn't. Not exactly, not yet. It was the opposite of terrifying. It was wrong in a direction that didn't have a name. It was too still, too present. Most ruins on dead worlds look like things that have been defeated by time, collapsed, eroded, scattered. This looked like something that had simply been waiting, patiently, for 11 hours or 11,000 years, with no particular preference between the two. It was not on any chart. Sable had checked 3 times. Medikey. Vale again, barely louder. Thessa Kun looked up from her scanner with the expression of someone who had just been interrupted in the middle of a thought they were hoping to finish alone. Atmospheric readings are consistent with the surface. No biological signatures within sensor range. A pause so brief it might have been a breath. Equipment's performing within acceptable parameters. Sable, who had been watching Thessa's hands, noted that she ran the scan a second time before closing the screen. She filed this away without comment. Sable was very good at filing things away without comment. It was, professionally and personally, her most refined skill. Peldas stood a few meters off, his lasgun held in the careful way of someone who had been taught to look relaxed and had not yet learned how. 19 years old, and trying so visibly to be 25 that it made something in Sable's chest ache to look at him directly. He was staring at the structure. "It's too quiet," he said, "for something dead." Nobody answered him. "Dead things don't hold their breath," he added, quieter, as if he'd heard himself and wasn't sure he'd meant to speak. Sergeant Vile began issuing the entry protocol in the clipped, efficient shorthand of someone for whom procedure was not bureaucracy, but architecture. The framework inside which you survived things that should have killed you. Perimeter sweep, 2-meter spacing, Sable on the left flank maintaining broadcast. Standard. Correct. The kind of orders that had worked on 100 worlds and would work on this one. Sable moved left. And beneath the carrier wave, beneath the signal she was broadcasting, beneath the 7 minutes and counting silence of unanswered distress, she heard something. She almost didn't. It was buried deep, threaded through the static the way a single voice is threaded through a crowd. Identifiable only if you already knew what you were listening for. A pattern. Low, rhythmic, not quite tonal. Not words. Something older than words perhaps, or younger. something that preceded the decision to arrange sounds into meaning and simply arrange them into something else instead. She had heard it before. Not here, not recently, not anywhere she could place with certainty. But the frequency sat against her eardrums with the specific comfort of the familiar, the way a childhood smell can return you to a room you haven't stood in for 20 years and make you feel, briefly and without logic, safe. Interference on the lower band, she reported, keeping her voice flat. Static artifact. I'll filter it. She did not filter it. She turned the gain up 2 degrees with her left hand, while her right held the Voxcaster steady, and her face held the expression of someone performing routine maintenance. The pattern clarified slightly, retreated slightly, like something that had noticed being listened to and wasn't sure yet whether to continue. She turned it back down before anyone could look at her readings. The structure's entrance, if it was an entrance, it was an opening, certainly, a gap in the geometry that a person could pass through, faced them without ceremony. No markings at the threshold, no iconography, no language, no evidence of purpose. The surface material was dark and non-reflective, in a way that went slightly beyond what the material itself should have been capable of. Sable's suit light hit it and returned less than it should have. She recalibrated her lamp. Same result. Surveyor's last ping originated from inside, Vile said. She was looking at her own auspex, a small furrow between her brows that Sable had learned to read as controlled unease. 12.4 meters in, ground floor. If there's a ground floor, Pell said. There's a ground floor, Vale said, with the certainty of someone who needed there to be. Thessa had moved to the edge of the entrance and was standing very still, not scanning, just standing. Sable watched her and thought about the way she had run the scan twice and closed it without sharing. She thought about the set of Thessa's shoulders, which were doing something complicated that had nothing to do with the cold. Kun, Sable said, low enough that Vale wouldn't pass it as a question, only a check-in. You good? Thessa turned, smiled in the way of someone who had learned that smiling ended further inquiry. Fine, she said. Cold. They entered in standard formation. Vile on point, Pell and Thessa center, Sable rear with the Voxcaster broadcasting continuously. The structure swallowed them with no drama and no sound. Their bootsteps, which should have echoed, didn't. The surfaces absorbed the noise with quiet efficiency, the way the walls absorbed light. It wasn't silence. It was closer to erasure. The sounds were made and then unmade, leaving a flat, pressureless absence in their place. 12.4 meters. Sable counted her steps. The temperature did not drop as they moved inside, which it should have. Dead structures on airless moons held the residual cold of deep space in their bones like a confession. This one held something else. A warmth that was not generated, not circulated, not explained by any thermal system she could identify. A warmth that sat at, she realized, exactly the temperature of a living body, 37 degrees, as if whatever had built this place had calibrated it to receive something with a pulse and had been maintaining the temperature against the day of its arrival with the patient certainty that the day would come. She did not report this. 11 steps. 12. Vile raised a fist and they stopped. The auspex in her hand was reading something ahead. She turned it towards Sable without comment, and Sable looked at it, and the number on the screen was not a distance, or a temperature, or a life sign. It was a frequency, the exact frequency of the pattern in the static. Sable became very still. She was good at this. Stillness under observation, stillness under pressure. The kind of stillness that people read as calm, and that was in fact something different. Something closer to the pause between a lightning strike and the sound it makes when the electricity has already moved and the air is still catching up. She handed the Auspex back. "Signal artifact," she said. "Old infrastructure resonance. These structures sometimes hold frequency imprints from original construction. It's in the literature." She had never read this in any literature. She did not know why she said it with such certainty. The certainty felt in a way she could not afford to examine, borrowed. Vile nodded once, moved forward. 13 steps, 14. Behind her, behind all of them, outside, in the dead grey regolith and the Ghoul Stars pale in different light. The Voxcaster Sable had left broadcasting its distress call on repeat, did something she would not discover until she reviewed the transmission log 9 minutes later. It transmitted, not the distress call, not the loop she had set. Something else, a single burst, 3 seconds long, that had not been initiated by any hand on any control. Her own voice, precise and professional, broadcasting coordinates with no waver and no hesitation. The coordinates of the structure. The timestamp on the burst was 6 minutes before their Valkyrie had broken atmosphere. 6 minutes before any of them had known where they were landing. Before Sable had known. Before anyone alive, by any possible reckoning, could have known. The carrier wave resumed. The distress call continued its patient loop. The Ghoul Stars offered no comment. Something in the dark, beneath the static, counted. The signal was here before you were. It knew the shape of your arrival. It has been waiting with the patience of something that does not experience waiting as loss. Inside the structure, 12.4 meters in, something that was once a Navy surveyor is sitting against a wall. She has been broadcasting for 9 days. The team has been on this moon for 11 hours. Vox operator Sable Orin is about to see her. And the first thing she will notice, before the blank eyes, before the locked posture, before the 9 days of impossible survival, is that the surveyor is broadcasting on the frequency, the one Sable has been hearing since childhood, the one she just told her sergeant was a signal artifact, the one that Sable now understands with a cold and terrible clarity has never been a signal artifact. It has always been a voice, and it has always been calling her, specifically, by name. Chapter 2. What the static carries. Thessa Kun is trying to destroy evidence in a dead structure on a moon with no name, and she is running out of time to do it quietly. The sealed Vox log sits in her palm, a data slug, small enough to close a fist around, scratched at one corner from 3 years of being carried in a place she could reach without thinking. She has carried it the way some people carry guilt and others carry faith, constantly, without display, because the weight of it has become so familiar that she no longer notices it until a moment like this one, when she notices nothing else. She thumbs the deletion sequence, enters her access code, watches the confirmation prompt blink once, twice, patient as a heartbeat. The wall beside her begins to hum, not loudly, not threateningly. A low resonance, barely above sensation, that moves through the non-reflective surface and into the bones of her hand with the intimacy of something that knows exactly where her skeleton is. She pulls her hand back. The hum continues for 3 seconds and then stops. She looks at the data slug. The confirmation prompt is gone. In its place, a single line of text she did not type, in a font her equipment does not carry. Not yet. Thessa closes her hand around the slug, closes her face into something that will pass under low light and high stress for composure. She slides it back into her inner pocket, against her sternum, where she has kept it for 3 years, where it sits now like a coal that has forgotten how to cool. She does not tell anyone what the wall said. She turns and follows the sound of Vale's boots deeper into the structure, and the hum does not return, and the silence that replaces it is somehow worse for knowing what it chose not to say. 12.4 meters. The surveyor was exactly where the Auspex said she would be. seated against the far wall of a chamber that had no business existing inside the external dimensions of the structure, which Sable had measured from the outside by habit, and which should, by any honest accounting of the geometry, have ended 4 meters ago. The room simply continued past where the walls should have been. Not dramatically, not impossibly at first glance, just slightly. Just enough that you'd have to be the kind of person who counted steps and measured sight lines to catch it. Sable was exactly that kind of person. She said nothing. The surveyor's name was stenciled on her breastplate. Arvane R. 114th Survey Course. And she sat with the specific absolute stillness of someone in whom all voluntary movement had simply stopped. Not unconscious, not dead. The bio readings on Thessa's scanner, which she shared this time without being asked, registered full vital function. Pulse, respiration, neural activity, all present, all within acceptable range. A living body, occupied, apparently, by something that had stopped requiring it to do anything. Her Voxcaster was in her lap, broadcasting. Sable isolated the frequency in the first 5 seconds and spent the next 10 telling herself she was wrong. She checked the reading, checked it again. The frequency stared back at her from the display with the placid indifference of a fact that had no investment in whether she accepted it. The same frequency, the one from the static, the one from the auspex in the corridor, the one she had been hearing in quiet moments and between sleeping and waking since before she was old enough to have the vocabulary for what hearing something in silence meant. Surveyor Arvane had been broadcasting it for 9 days. The team had been on this moon for 11 hours. "She's alive," Thessa said, in the careful voice of someone delivering information they wish were different. Physically intact, no trauma, no injury, no signs of environmental exposure despite... She paused. Despite the duration. 9 days without resupply, Pell said. He was standing slightly behind Sable's shoulder, and she could feel the effort it cost him to keep his voice level. No food, no water recycling on a suit that size. 9 days. The suit's systems are nominal, Thessa said. Everything functioning as if she'd been stationary for 6 hours. That's not possible, Pell said. Nobody disagreed with him. Vile crouched in front of the surveyor. Close, but not touching. The professional's instinct for the unknown. Respect wearing the costume of caution. She passed her hand slowly in front of Arvane's eyes. No tracking, no response. The eyes were open and they were looking at something that was not in this room, or possibly not in this dimension, or possibly not anywhere that had a name in any imperial lexicon Vael had been issued. Arvane, she said. Quiet but present. The voice she used when she needed someone to come back from somewhere far away. Surveyor Arvane, can you hear me? The frequency continued broadcasting. Sable had been slowly, carefully, adjusting her Voxcaster's reception, while the others focused on Arvane. Separating the broadcast layer from the carrier layer. Peeling back the frequency the way you peel back skin, carefully, because below it there is something that doesn't want to be exposed. Below the frequency, there was a second signal. Beneath the second signal, a third. She had done this once before, years ago, her first week in Vox training, listening to a deep-range transmission from a Navy picket line and discovering that below the official channel, below even the encrypted military band, there was something that the trainer had told her was warp echo, residual signal bleed from the immaterium, meaningless, harmless, the etheric equivalent of static. She had known even then that the trainer was wrong. The sounds in the deep static were not random. They had shape. They had, almost, grammar. She had never told anyone. The third signal beneath Arvane's broadcast was not warp echo. It was voices, fragments. First, syllables disconnected from words, words disconnected from sentences. The acoustic equivalent of finding pages from a book you've never read, scattered across a floor, and trying to reconstruct the story from what landed face up. She caught gender, cadence, the specific rhythm of speech that belongs to people who have known each other long enough to leave words out. Comfortable speech, familiar speech, the speech of people who are not afraid of each other. Then, beneath the fragments, something coherent. A voice she recognized. She turned the gain down immediately. Her hands were steady. She had very steady hands. It was a professional requirement, and she had made it a personal one. She stood with her back partially to the group, and her face pointed at her equipment, and she breathed carefully, in through her nose and out through her mouth. And she thought, that voice has been dead for 2 years. Warrant Officer Decimal, 6th Signals Battalion, died at the Vorsian crossing when the relay station took a direct hit, and the 6 personnel inside did not have time to become 6 survivors. Sable had known her for 8 months, had eaten across from her at a field table in the rain on a world whose name she'd since forgotten, and talked about nothing. About food, about the noise the atmospheric processors made at night, about whether the new ciphers were actually more secure or just more complicated. The specific, irreplaceable texture of a friendship assembled from small moments. The kind of friendship you don't know you needed until you're standing in a dead structure beneath the Ghoul Stars, hearing its voice come through the static of a catatonic woman's Vox caster. The second voice she recognized belonged to Corporal Fen Soul. Same posting, same strike, same absence. They were talking to each other, in the present tense, about this structure, about this moon, about the team that had just arrived, whose drop she had logged, and whose approach she had tracked, and whose configuration she described. 4 personnel, 1 Vox operator, entry through the primary aperture at the 11th hour mark, with the specificity of someone who had been watching from nearby. Sable's suit had a log function she activated now, silently, recording every frequency simultaneously. Her face held the expression of someone troubleshooting minor equipment variants. She was not troubleshooting minor equipment variants. She was recording the voices of 2 people who had been dead for 2 years, discussing her team's movements in real time, and she was doing it without her hands shaking, and without her voice breaking, and without giving Sergeant Vael any reason to look at her directly. She was very good at this. She had always been very good at this. The question she was not asking herself, the question she would not ask herself for another 4 minutes when the transmission clarified further and made the not asking impossible, was why she was protecting the signal instead of reporting it. She knew protocol. Anomalous Vox contact on a non-imperial frequency in the Ghoul Stars. Report immediately, cease reception, document and withdraw. She had been trained on this. She had trained others on this. The protocol existed because signals in the Ghoul Stars were not signals. The way signals elsewhere were signals. They were invitations, and the Imperium had learned, at significant cost in blood and sanity, that you did not accept invitations from things that lived in this particular dark. She knew all of this. She turned the gain up instead. The voices sharpened. Marlon Soul, dead 2 years, talking about the structure with the easy familiarity of people who had been here long enough to stop finding it strange. And then Marl said something that made the air in Sable's lungs go cold and still. She said, "She can already hear us." A pause. The static breathed. She just hasn't admitted it yet. The transmission cut. Clean, complete, without fade. The way a door closes when someone on the other side has decided the conversation is finished for now. In the silence, Sable became aware of 2 things simultaneously. The first, Surveyor Arvane was smiling, not broadly, not warmly. A small, precise adjustment of the muscles around her mouth, there and then gone. like a signature on a document that had just been witnessed. Her eyes remained fixed on whatever they had been fixed on since she sat down 9 days ago, or 9 minutes ago, or 9,000 years ago, against this wall. The smile appeared and departed, and left no trace except in the memory of everyone who saw it and the cold it deposited, like a coin dropped in still water, in the center of Sable Orin's chest. The second thing, Pell was staring at Sable. Not at Arvane, not at the walls, at Sable, with the expression of someone who has been watching a person for long enough to notice the moment they stopped reacting to something they should be reacting to. The expression of someone 19 years old, and honest enough that he had not yet learned to look away from the things that other, more experienced people had learned to pretend they hadn't seen. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The carrier wave resumed. Arvane broadcast her frequency into the body-warm dark, patient and continuous, as she had been doing for 9 days before they arrived, and would continue doing. Sable understood with a certainty she could not yet afford to name long after they were gone. Unless they were not going to be gone. Unless that was not the kind of thought she should be having. The static carried its voices. The walls held their warmth, and somewhere in the architecture of Sable Orin's mind, in the part that had always heard things in silence, something that had been waiting for a very long time, recognized where it was and began, quietly and without announcement, to settle in. The dead are speaking in present tense. They know your team's composition, your entry point, your 11th hour arrival, and one of them just said your operator's name, not as a subject, as someone they've been expecting. The surveyor has stopped smiling, but the Voxcaster hasn't stopped broadcasting, and Sable Orin, who has just recorded 6 minutes of impossible transmission, has not reported a single second of it. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself when protecting a signal became more important than protecting the people standing next to you. Ask yourself if Sable Orin is asking herself the same question. The answer, when it comes, will arrive in a voice you recognize. It always does. Chapter 3. The voice that knows your name. You answered it. Vael's voice is not raised. That is the first thing Sable registers. Not the words, not the accusation threaded through them like wire through muscle, but the absolute deliberate control of the volume. Vael is standing 2 meters away in the body-warm dark of the structure's inner corridor, and she is speaking at exactly the level required to be heard, and no louder, and the restraint of it is more frightening than shouting would have been. Shouting is release. This is containment. This is a woman holding something behind her teeth that, if it got out, she would not be able to put back. You answered it, she says again, on an unclassified frequency, in an active, anomalous contact situation, without authorization, without logging the transmission, without... I don't remember answering it, Sable says. The corridor goes very quiet. That, Vael says, after a moment that has weight to it, that lands and stays, is not the reassurance you think it is. She is right. Sable knows she is right. She has been knowing it for the last 40 minutes, since Vael pulled her aside with a grip on her arm that was professional in pressure and personal in duration, and showed her the transmission log on the Voxcaster. And Sable had looked at the log the way you look at something that shouldn't exist. First with confusion, then with the specific nauseating clarity of understanding that arrives too late to be useful. 14 seconds of outgoing transmission. Her voice, her cadence, her phrasing, her particular way of clipping the ends of technical terminology that her first instructor had tried to train out of her and failed. Unmistakably her. Transmitted on the frequency. The one below the carrier wave. The one she'd been filtering and not filtering. The one Arvane had been broadcasting from her seat against the wall for 9 impossible days. 14 seconds. She had no memory of any of it. "What did I say?" she asks, because she has to. Vial holds her gaze for 3 seconds. "I don't know," she says. "It transmitted below the range of our translation matrix. Whatever language it was." She stops, recalibrates. Whatever it wasn't low Gothic. Sable processes this, files it in the same place she has been filing everything since they entered this structure. The growing archive of things she understands and is not yet ready to understand, she understands. "I need your Voxcaster," Vial says. "If you take the Voxcaster, we lose our only—" "I need your Voxcaster, Orin." Sable unclips it, places it in Vale's hands, watches her sergeant hold it with the careful grip of someone handling something they've decided to be afraid of, and feels, beneath the professionalism and the protocol and the entirely reasonable recognition, that Vial is correct to take it. A pull. A small, insistent pull, like a thread caught on something behind her sternum, drawing taut as the Voxcaster moves away from her. She says nothing. She is becoming very practiced at saying nothing. The Valkyrie did not respond on primary. It did not respond on secondary, on emergency band, on the short-range tactical channel, or on the personal locator frequency that each of their suits broadcast continuously, and that a functioning aircraft within orbital range should have been picking up as a matter of basic automated operation. Vial tried for 11 minutes. She was methodical about it, channel by channel, gain adjusted at each step. No wasted movement, no wasted breath. Sable watched her and thought about what 11 minutes of silence on every channel meant, and arrived at the same answer every time. "Valkyrie's gone," Pell said. Not loudly, not with any particular inflection. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, laser gun across his knees, and he said it the way you say something you've been doing the arithmetic on for long enough to trust the result. "We don't know that," Vale said. "Atmospheric interference," Thessa offered, without conviction. "There isn't any atmospheric interference," Pell said. "There's no atmosphere. There's nothing up there that could—" He stopped, looked at the Voxcaster in Vale's hands. "Nothing natural," he amended. From the chamber behind them, Arvane continued broadcasting. The Voxcaster, Vale's now, Sable's no longer, crackled once. They all heard it. Vale's grip tightened on it by a degree that her face did not acknowledge, and then the voices came through again, cleaner than before. The two dead voices moving through their conversation with the ease of people who had been here long enough to stop being careful. Marl's voice, warm and unhurried. It came down cleanly. Eastern approach, slight crosswind correction at 40 meters, standard landing strut deployment. Pilot held it level. Sewells. Good pilot. Good pilot, Marl agreed. She waited on the ramp for a moment before she lifted, watched them cross the ridge. Then she went. The detail landed in the silence like a stone in still water. The crosswind correction. The ramp. Sable had stood on that ramp for a moment before she crossed the ridge. She remembered the wind drag against her suit, the habit of taking one last look at an exit before you moved away from it. Standard operational instinct. The kind of detail that existed in no report, in no mission log, in no transmission that had left this moon. The kind of detail only a witness could know. Pell said very quietly, "They were watching us land." "They're dead," Voyle said. The words came out clipped, deployed like a barrier. "Yes," Pell said. He did not say it like a challenge. He said it like a man acknowledging a fact that fails to resolve the problem it's been offered to resolve. He looked up at Vial, and his face was 19 years old. and exhausted with the effort of being brave in a situation that had stopped rewarding the effort. "Sergeant," he said, "I don't think we're going to leave." The corridor held the words. Vielle stared at him. "That is not. I'm not saying it to frighten anyone," Pell said, with a patience that was somehow more unsettling than fear would have been. "I'm saying it because it's what the situation looks like when I add up all the parts of it. The Valkyrie's gone. The signal knew we were coming before we arrived. The surveyor has been alive for 9 days on a dead moon without resupply, and she's broadcasting something that Orin recognizes." He paused, looked at Sable. "You do recognize it. I've been watching you since we landed, and you've been recognizing it this whole time." The silence that followed had the quality of a confession. It was Thessa who spoke into it, and what she said changed the shape of the room. "I've been here before," she said. "Not this structure. This..." She stopped, pressed her lips together, made the decision Sable could see her making. The decision to let something out that she'd been holding the door shut on for 3 years. A Vox relay station. Edge of the Ghoul Stars. Theta 9 designation. 9 personnel, including myself. 18 months ago. We lost contact with command. She was looking at the floor. 17 days. Nobody spoke. When contact resumed, they told us we'd been transmitting continuously for the full 17 days. Operational logs, they said. We'd been logging everything. Detailed, coherent, formatted correctly. She exhaled. None of us remembered any of it. Not a single transmission. 17 days of continuous broadcast, and 9 people with no memory of having opened their mouths. Pell had gone very still. They pulled us out, debriefed us individually. Medical assessment, psychological evaluation, the full sequence. She paused. And then they sealed the logs. All of them, except one. Her hand moved involuntarily to her inner pocket, the motion of someone checking that something is still there. They gave each of us a personal record, our own voice for 17 days, our own words. She looked up. "I've never played mine." Vielle said. "Why not?" "Because," Thessa said, with the specific flatness of someone who has rehearsed an answer until it stopped feeling like the truth and has run out of rehearsals. "I'm afraid I'll understand it." The signal evolved over the next 20 minutes, the way a language evolves in the presence of people who need it. Gradually, responsively, filling the shape of its container. It began with echoing. A word spoken aloud would return through the Voxcaster a half-second later. Exact, tonally matched. Vielle said perimeter, and perimeter came back. Pell said nothing, and nothing came back with an inflection that was almost, not quite, a question. Then it began completing sentences. Vielle, mid-tactical assessment. "If the Valkyrie is gone, we need to consider our..." And from the Vox, quiet and precise. "Options. 3. None of them simple." She stopped speaking, stared at the Voxcaster, did not pick it up. Thessa, to no one in particular. The station logs were sealed because command didn't want, and from the Vox, anyone asking what you were transmitting to. They knew it wasn't command you were talking to. They've always known about the frequency. The 4 of them stood in the body-warm corridor and breathed. Then it began correcting. Pell quietly, almost to himself. "I'm scared." And from the Vox, not unkindly, with something in the tone that was adjacent to compassion. "Uncertain. You're uncertain. Scared implies the outcome is bad. You don't know the outcome yet." It was the word "yet" that did it. The specific choice of it. The implication folded inside it. That the outcome was knowable. That someone in this exchange knew it. That the uncertainty was Pell's condition, and not the signal's. Sable stood apart from the others and felt the thread behind her sternum draw taut again. She was thinking about a Vox relay tower on a world called Verath Sorn that no longer existed. Glassed in the first year of a campaign she had been too young to understand, and the static she had listened to as a child through the tower's secondary harmonics that drifted as far as the hab block where she grew up. She had sat by her window and listened to it the way other children listen to music, the shapes in it, the almost grammar of it, the frequency that sat against her eardrums like a word in a language she'd been born almost knowing. She had thought she was strange. She was beginning to understand she had been, since before she could remember, aimed. Not broken, not aberrant, aimed. The way a lens is aimed, shaped for a specific light, ground to a specific angle, positioned to receive what ordinary glass would scatter. She had been placed near that tower the way you place an instrument near a source. She had been carried through a career in Vox work, the way a signal is carried through a medium. Not against its nature, but along it. The signal had not found her. She had been built to find it. The Voxcaster spoke. Not fragments, not echoes. A full transmission, the clearest it had ever been, addressed. The address was unmistakable, direct. Her name in her own voice's cadence, though the voice was not hers. To Sable Orin specifically. It said, "You are not in danger. None of you are in danger from me." It said, "I have been trying to reach you for a very long time. Since Verath Sorn. Since before Verath Sorn. You have always been close to hearing me clearly, and something has always intervened." It said, "I know you can hear the difference between what I am and what they are afraid I am. You have always been able to hear that difference. That is why you are here." The corridor was absolutely silent. Vile's hand was on her weapon. Pell had not moved. Thessa was looking at Sable with an expression that contained, in equal measure, recognition and dread. The expression of someone watching a pattern complete itself that they had hoped would turn out to be coincidence. The Vox said, "Ask Thessa what she said on day 4. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Thessa's face did something that Sable had no word for. The color left it, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way light leaves a room when the source is slowly covered. Her hand went to her inner pocket, closed around the data slug, the one she had been carrying for 3 years, the one the wall had told her not yet when she tried to destroy it an hour ago. The yet had apparently expired. She looked at Sable, at Vale, at Pell, who was watching her with the open, honest face of someone who was not going to look away. She pulled the data slug free, held it in her palm. The small, scratched corner caught the dim light. She pressed play. The log begins. Thessa's voice fills the corridor, her voice, unmistakably, exactly as it sounds when she is calm and clinical and in complete professional control. Day 4. She is describing coordinates. She is describing a structure. She is describing a team of 4. A sergeant, a junior guardsman, a medicae, a Vox operator, whose name she did not know 3 years ago. She is describing them as if she has been watching them for years. She is describing them as if she has been waiting. She is describing Sable Orin, by name, with something in her voice that is not fear and is not wonder, something that sounds unbearably like relief. Chapter 4. What she said on day 4. The voice on the log is Thessa's. That is the first thing. That is the thing Sable keeps returning to in the seconds after the log begins, because it matters. It matters the way the ground matters when you are falling, not as comfort, but as the fact around which everything else must be oriented. The voice is Thessa's. Same register, same slight clipping of sibilance, same pause pattern before technical terminology that Sable has catalogued over 31 hours of shared mission time. It is Thessa's voice, the way the structure's warmth is warmth, real, measurable, present, and wrong in a direction that the instruments cannot fully articulate. The voice says, Day 4. The operator will arrive from the coreward approach. She has always heard the frequency. She does not yet know that hearing it and carrying it are the same thing. She will understand this inside the structure. The structure will be ready. A pause. Static. Then, her name is Sable Orin. She was born within range of the Verath Sorn relay. The relay was placed there for this purpose. The world was allowed to continue for as long as it was needed and not longer. She has been in transit toward this coordinates for her entire life without knowing she was in transit. She is not a victim. She is not a subject. Another pause. Longer. She is a carrier. The log continues. Thessa stops it. The corridor holds the word, the way the structure holds warmth. Completely, without releasing it, as if it was always meant to be here, and the air has simply adjusted to accommodate it. Carrier. Sable is aware of her own breathing, aware of Pell to her left, who has gone the particular stillness of someone whose body has decided to spend its resources somewhere other than movement. Aware of Vael, who is standing with her hand still resting on her weapon, in the posture of someone who has been trained to respond to threats and has arrived at a situation where the threat is a word and the weapon is decorative. Aware, most precisely, of Thessa, who is looking at the data slug in her palm with the expression of someone who has just watched a door they spent 3 years holding shut swing open from the other side, and understands now that the thing on the other side was not trying to get in. It was waiting for them to be ready to look. 3 years, Vael says. Her voice is very controlled. You've been carrying this for 3 years. I didn't know what it meant, Thessa says. You knew enough to not play it. Yes. No deflection, no qualification. I knew enough to not play it. Vael turns away, not in anger, or not only in anger, in the way of someone who needs a direction to face that isn't another person's eyes. She puts her hands flat against the wall and stands there and breathes, and the wall holds her temperature back at her like a mirror, 37 degrees, body warm, patient. Sable watches her sergeant's shoulders and thinks about Verath Sorn, thinks about the relay tower visible from her childhood window, its running lights cycling in the dark, the low harmonic it cast across the Hab block rooftops on still nights. She had thought it was beautiful. She had thought she was peculiar for thinking so. Her mother had called it an eyesore, and her bunkmates had called it background noise, and Sable had lain awake listening to it with the specific attention of someone receiving something they cannot yet read. The world had been glassed when she was 11. She had been off-world for a training attachment. The only child from her Hab block who had been anywhere else when it happened. She had assumed this was luck. The world was allowed to continue for as long as it was needed and not longer. She sits down, not because she decides to. Her legs simply renegotiate the terms of their involvement, and the floor comes up to meet her, and she is sitting, back against the wall, in the same posture as Arvane, in the chamber behind them. She notices this, files it somewhere she will not open. Play the rest, she says. Orin, Vael begins. Play the rest of it, Thessa. Thessa plays the rest of it. Day 4 runs for 11 minutes. Thessa's voice moves through it with the calm efficiency of someone dictating a report they have complete confidence in. No hesitation, no uncertainty. The voice of a person who knows exactly what they are saying and why. She describes the structure in architectural detail that matches what they are standing in precisely. The geometry that exceeds its external dimensions, the light-absorbing surfaces, the body temperature warmth maintained throughout. She describes the surveyor, not by name but by function, the anchor, the one who stays to keep the frequency stable, the one who has already completed the transition. And she describes her position against the chamber wall with an accuracy that is not approximate but exact, down to the angle of the Vox caster in her lap. She describes the team. Vial first, the sergeant. She will be the last to understand because understanding requires releasing the framework she has built her survival on. The framework is real. The framework has kept her alive. This will make it harder, not easier to put down. She is not an obstacle. She is someone who will need more time than the others. Time is available. Pell goes very quiet when his entry plays. The young one will be the first to say the true thing out loud. He always is. The young ones who have not yet learned to protect themselves from honesty are valuable in these moments. He will be frightened, and he will be honest about being frightened. And this honesty will be the most useful thing anyone does inside the structure. Thessa does not react visibly when her own entry plays. She listens to her voice describe her with the same detachment a surgeon applies to their own imaging results. Because the alternative to detachment, in this moment, is something she cannot afford. The Medici carries the log, because she was always meant to carry it here. She is the mechanism of delivery. She does not need to understand this to fulfill it. Understanding is a gift for afterward, for the ones who remain in a condition to receive gifts. The ones who remain. Vial catches it. Sable sees her catch it. A small tension in the jaw, a fractional stillness. The tell of a person who has just heard a word they need to interrogate but won't. Not yet. Because pulling that thread right now will unravel something they need to stay intact. Then Sable's entry. The carrier. She was made for this the way instruments are made. With intention, with precision, with a specific frequency in mind. She has been moving toward this structure since before the concept of movement was available to her. She does not need to be convinced or coerced or broken. She needs only to be given enough silence to hear what she has always been hearing. The signal is not foreign to her. The signal is the oldest familiar thing she has. She will recognize it as herself before she recognizes it as anything else. This is the design. This is why it works. The log ends. The static resumes. Pell speaks first. He says, "This was never a rescue mission." Not as a question. As the last piece of arithmetic, the final line of the sum, stated aloud so the answer becomes real. The surveyor's beacon, Sable says, it was placed deliberately. To bring us here, Thessa says. To bring you here. She stops. We were the delivery mechanism, the specific combination of people required to get you inside this structure. The beacon was registered as a genuine distress call, Vial says. Her voice has the quality of someone testing the structural integrity of something they are still standing on. It went through standard Munitorum verification. The assignment came through proper channels. Yes, Sable says. It would. Vial turns to look at her. The look contains a question she doesn't know how to ask, because asking it requires accepting premises she has not yet formally accepted. Sable answers it anyway. If it has been planning this since Vereth Sorn, she says. Since before Vereth Sorn, since wherever it was before it needed a relay tower on a hab world to tune a child to its frequency, then routing a false distress call through Munitorum verification is not difficult. It is trivial. It is the last step of something that has been in preparation for longer than any of us have been alive. The silence after this is different from the previous silences. The previous silences had been the silence of people absorbing shock. This one is the silence of people standing at the edge of a scale. They have just finished measuring and finding that it exceeds every category they were issued for measurement. Vial crosses the corridor. She picks up the Vox caster and she looks at it, and then she looks at Sable with the expression of a woman making a decision she knows she will not be able to unmake. I'm going to destroy it, she says. The caster, the data slug, the surveyor's equipment, all of it. We go dark. We move back to the extraction point. We burn the emergency ground beacon, and we wait for whoever responds. The emergency beacon already transmitted, Sable says quietly. An hour ago, in your voice, giving the all clear. Vial stops. I didn't, no, Sable says. You didn't. The Vox caster in Vale's hands transmits without being activated. No one touches a control. The voices of Marl and Sewell do not return. What comes through instead is single, sustained, clear, a tone that is almost musical, that sits at the precise frequency Sable has been hearing since childhood, that resonates in the fillings of their teeth and the fluid of their inner ears, and somewhere deeper than that, somewhere that does not have an anatomical name. It lasts for 7 seconds. When it ends, Vale sets the Voxcaster down with extreme care. Her hands, Sable notices, are shaking. Not much, enough. When you answered it, Pell says. He is looking at Sable. He asked this question once before, hours ago, in a different version of this conversation, and she had not answered it. His face says he is going to need her to answer it now. When it speaks to you and you answer, what does it feel like? Sable has been avoiding this question with the professionalism of someone who knows that naming a thing makes it real and has been choosing unreality as a survival strategy. She looks at Pell's honest, exhausted, 19-year-old face and understands that the survival strategy has reached the end of its operational parameters. Like being understood, she says. Not interpreted, not processed. She looks at her hands. Like someone hearing exactly what you mean before you've decided how to say it. Like, she stops, finds the truest version of it. Like the feeling you had as a child, when you thought you were strange, when you thought something was wrong with you, and then you found one person who heard what you heard, and you understood that you were not broken, that you were just early, waiting for the right frequency. Pell nods slowly. He does not look relieved by this answer. He looks like someone who asked a question and received an honest answer and is now in possession of a truth that is going to cost him something to carry. The surveyor stands up. She moves through the chamber entrance into the corridor with the unhurried purpose of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and recognizes it arriving. She crosses to Sable. She holds out the Voxcaster, her own, the one she has been broadcasting from for 9 days, the one whose frequency Sable has been hearing since she was a child, near a tower, on a world that was kept alive long enough to tune her and then permitted to end. The handoff is gentle, both hands. The way you pass something irreplaceable. Sable takes it. She does not decide to take it. Her hands receive it the way hands receive something they have been waiting to hold, with the ease of a gesture that has been rehearsed in a place below conscious intention. The Voxcaster settles against her palm, and the frequency moves through it and through her hand and up her arm and into the part of her that has always been listening. And it feels, God Emperor forgive her, it feels like coming home. The surveyor opens her mouth. Sable's voice comes out. It says, "You already know what you're going to do." Sable looks at it, in her own voice, in another woman's mouth, describing her own future to her face, and understands with a cold and complete and terrible clarity that it is right. She does know. She has known since the first chapter of Static on the Approach, since the frequency in the Auspex reading. Marl's voice through the dead air, since Thessa's log, since the word carrier hung in the corridor, and she sat against the wall in Arvane's posture, without deciding to. She knows what she is going to do. The thought arrives in her mind one breath before she thinks it. Spoken already, by whatever has been waiting inside the frequency since before Verath Sorn was a name on any map. Vile's emergency beacon transmitted in her own voice an hour ago. Pel's boots will be found placed neatly side by side. Thessa has one functioning weapon and a decision she has already made and not yet acted on. And Sable Orin is holding the Voxcaster that was always meant for her hands. 14 days after the drop, someone is still broadcasting. They sound completely calm. They sound like they have been waiting for you to listen. They sound, God Emperor help you, like someone you recognize. Chapter 5. Last transmission. The boots are the first thing the recovery team finds. They are positioned at the structure's threshold, outside on the grey regolith, where the dead moon's surface begins and the geometry of the building ends. Placed with care. Laces untied, as if removed without haste, without crisis. The way you remove something at the end of a day when you are finally somewhere you intend to stay. The name stenciled on the inner lining reads DASTP. The boots are a size too large for a 19-year-old, bought with the expectation of growing into them, the way young soldiers buy everything, against a future they are confident enough to plan for. There is no other trace of Peldast, no remains, not equipment, not the laser gun he held across his knees when he sat against the wall and did mathematics and arrived at honest answers. The boots are the entire record of his ending, and they are neat, and they are deliberate, and they suggest a departure rather than an absence, which is somehow the most difficult thing about them to look at directly. Sergeant Irene Vielle is found inside. 14 years of service. Fourth wall of the primary chamber, equidistant from the entrance and the far end, seated with her back straight and her hands in her lap, and her Voxcaster broadcasting on the frequency. Her eyes are open. Her vitals, when the recovery medici checks, register full function. Pulse, respiration, neural activity, everything present, everything nominal. A living body maintained at 37 degrees, in a structure that has been maintaining living bodies at 37 degrees for longer than anyone in the recovery team is comfortable calculating. Her weapon is holstered. Her hands are empty. She does not respond to her name. She has been broadcasting for 11 days. The recovery team does not find Thessa Kun. What they find instead, in the corridor outside the primary chamber, is a Vox log. Personal recording, addressed to whatever inquisitor finds this place, in the calm and clinical voice of a medicae who has done this before and knows exactly how much time she has. The log is thorough. It covers the mission from insertion to the moment of recording with the precision of someone who understands that the details matter, that whoever listens to this will need the details, that the details are the only gift she has left to give. It covers Pel's mathematics and his honest answers. It covers Thessa's own sealed log and what it said on day 4. It covers Sable receiving the Voxcaster from the surveyor's hands and what the surveyor said in Sable's voice, and the way Sable looked when she took it, not like someone surrendering, not like someone breaking, but like someone arriving, like someone who had been traveling for a very long time toward a specific place and had finally, after years of transit, cleared the final approach. The log ends with Thessa describing the structure beginning to resonate at the frequency of her voice, learning it, recording it. The sound of it entering her bones, the way the warmth enters everything that stays here long enough. She says, "In the last 10 seconds, I am going to use the weapon before it finishes. I want that on record. I want whoever listens to this to know that I chose, while I was still in a condition to choose, to not become what Sable has become. I want that to mean something. I want it on record that I do not think Sable is lost. I think that is the most frightening thing. I genuinely do not think she is lost. I think she is somewhere. I think she is somewhere that she finds. The log ends. There is no indication of what Thessa did or did not do with the weapon. There is no body. The recovery team notes both facts in their report and does not speculate. Some facts are courtesies. Some absences are the kindest thing a record can offer. What the recovery team came for, what brought a redacted team to an unnamed stellar body on the Ghoul Stars periphery 14 days after a missed extraction, is the transmission. It has been broadcasting continuously since day 3. It is on a frequency that should not carry this far, and does. It has been received on 17 vessels in the surrounding sectors, on 4 orbital stations, on a Navy signals relay that has been logging it without understanding what it is for 11 days, and flagging it as anomalous and routing it upward, and watching it get quietly rerouted sideways to offices that do not officially exist. It has been received, on at least 2 documented occasions, by Vox operators who later reported hearing it in their sleep, who reported that it sounded familiar, who reported that the familiarity was the strangest part, stranger than the content, stranger than the frequency, the sense that this was something they had always been close to hearing and had simply until now been at the wrong angle to receive. Their reassignment requests are also pending. The voice on the transmission is Sable Orin's. It is her voice in the same way the structure's warmth is warmth, real, measurable, present, and carrying something additional that the instruments record but cannot categorize. It is her voice the way a river is water, genuinely, but also more than that. Also shaped by everything it has moved through, also going somewhere. She speaks without pause, without apparent fatigue. For 114 hours, she has been transmitting, and in 114 hours, she has not repeated herself once. The transcription team flagged this on hour 6. By hour 40, they had stopped flagging anomalies. By hour 90, they were listening in shifts, 2 people at a time, with the third required to remain outside the room as a condition imposed by the senior officer present, who had begun to notice that the people inside were taking longer to emerge than the shift required, and that when they emerged they were quiet in a particular way, a way that reminded him of something he had seen before, on a posting he did not talk about, at the edge of these same stars. The senior officer's name is in the report. His own Vox log, recorded on day 12, is sealed. What Sable Orin says, in 114 hours of continuous transmission, is this. She describes the frequency. Not technically, not in signal parameters or wavelength measurements, but the way you describe something you love, which is to say, imprecisely and completely, reaching for the words that are almost right, and finding that almost right accumulates over enough attempts into something truer than precision. She describes what it sounds like to hear it clearly for the first time. She describes what it has always sounded like, and the difference between those 2 experiences, which is the difference between standing near something and standing inside it. She describes the structure. She describes its warmth. She describes Vale sitting against the wall broadcasting, and says that Vale is not absent, that absence is not what this is, that the closest word in Low Gothic is probably completed, but that word is inadequate in the specific direction of being too small, the way a cup is inadequate if what you're measuring is a C. She does not describe what happened to Pell. She describes Thessa with something in her voice that the transcription team noted as grief, which was the first emotion they had identified in 114 hours of transmission, and which several of them found more disturbing than everything that preceded it. Not because grief in this context was unexpected, but because of how clean it was. Grief without guilt. Grief without the particular weight of someone who believes they caused a loss. Grief for a distance, not a death. The grief of someone watching a light go out across water an understanding that the water itself goes on. She describes, in the final hours of what the recovery team has recovered so far, the ones who are listening, not in general, not abstractly. She describes specific Vox operators on specific vessels who have been receiving the signal in their sleep. She gives their names. She describes what they heard and how it felt to them and why it felt familiar and what the familiarity means, which is not what they fear it means, which is something older than fear and operating at a frequency that fear does not have the range to reach. She says, they were always close to hearing it. They just needed the right angle. She says, this is not recruitment. This is recognition. She says, the frequency is not mine. I do not own it. I am carrying it the way a Voxcaster carries a signal, faithfully, completely, without adding anything that isn't already there. The signal was here before I arrived. The signal will be here after every instrument that currently carries it has been retired or destroyed or forgotten. I am not the source. A pause. The static breathes beneath her voice like a second voice, patient, deep. I am just the one it found who could hear it clearly enough to carry it forward. There are others. There have always been others. You are listening to this transmission. Ask yourself how long you have been hearing it. Ask yourself what you thought it was. Ask yourself why it sounds underneath everything, underneath the fear and the distance and the years of almost hearing. Ask yourself why it sounds like the most familiar thing you have ever encountered. You know why. You have always known. This is not the beginning. The static holds. Sable Orin's voice continues, patient and warm and precise, carrying its frequency outward through the Ghoul Stars dark, toward every instrument tuned close enough to receive it. The recovery team's senior officer is outside the transcription room. He has been outside for 2 hours. He has not gone in to relieve the current shift. He is listening through the door. He has his hand flat against it. At 37 degrees, the door is exactly body warm. He has not yet decided whether this means anything. He is becoming less certain with each passing minute that the decision is still his to make. The transmission continues. It has not repeated itself once. It is not finished. Somewhere on this moon, in a structure that is not on any chart, a woman who was born near a relay tower on a world that no longer exists is still broadcasting. She sounds like herself. She sounds like she has finally arrived somewhere. She sounds like she has been trying to tell you something for a very long time. The carrier wave holds. The frequency moves outward. The static beneath it breathes. And if you have been listening closely, if you are the kind of person who hears things in silence, who has always heard things in silence, who has spent years assuming this was strangeness rather than signal, then somewhere beneath this transmission, beneath the voice and the words and the story you have just been carried through, you may have noticed something. A frequency, low, patient, familiar in a direction you cannot name. It has been there since the beginning. It was there before we started. You thought it was the sound of listening. It wasn't. It was the sound of being heard. This is Hollow Vox transmission. The archive remains open. The frequency continues. We will be here when you return. Thank you for watching.